My parents told me they'd emptied their savings years ago, that there was nothing left. I believed them right up until the moment I found a bank statement tucked inside a birthday card my mother had accidentally left on my kitchen counter, still unsealed, still addressed to my brother. I remember standing in my kitchen with Noah on my hip, him grabbing at the envelope with his little fists the way 3-year-olds grab at everything, and me thinking it was just a card, a Hallmark card with a check for $50 inside, the kind my parents had been sending my brother every year since college. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just setting it aside so it wouldn't get drool on it. But the flap had already come loose, and the paper inside slid halfway out on its own, and what I saw was not a birthday card. It was a printed bank transfer confirmation. $185,000. Dated March 14th, 3 years earlier. The same week, my son was fighting for his life in a cardiac ICU 2 states away. And my parents were telling me over and over, with voices full of what I thought was real grief, that they just didn't have anything left to give. I need you to understand something before I go any further. I need you to understand what March 14th, 3 years ago, actually looked like for me. Noah was born at 26 weeks and 4 days. He weighed 1 pound, 14 ounces. My husband Marcus and I had barely finished painting the nursery. We hadn't even had the baby shower yet. I was 31 weeks away from my due date when my water broke on a Tuesday morning while I was standing in front of my 3rd grade class reading them Charlotte's Web, and within 4 hours I was in emergency surgery, and then I was in recovery, being told that our son had a congenital heart defect that nobody had caught because we hadn't yet reached the anatomy scan where they would have seen it. A ventricular septal defect, the cardiologist said. A hole between the chambers of his heart. In a full-term baby, it might have been manageable. In a 26-weeker weighing under 2 pounds, it was immediately life-threatening. The hospital was 3 hours from our home. Marcus drove there in just over 2. I don't remember much of that first night except the sound of machines and a nurse named Patricia, who held my hand while she explained the surgical consent forms to me, because I couldn't stop shaking long enough to read them. Myself. The surgery alone was going to cost $62,000 out of pocket after insurance. Our plan had a cap on neonatal cardiac procedures that our HR department had never once mentioned during open enrollment, and we hit that cap on day 3. After that, everything, the follow-up procedures, the specialized nursing care, the medication protocols, all of it was on us. The hospital had a financial counselor. She was kind. She laid out our options on a laminated sheet, and none of them were good. We could apply for assistance, which would take 6 to 8 weeks to process, and Noah needed surgery in the next 10 days. We could apply for medical credit, which Marcus and I did immediately, and were approved for $20,000, which covered roughly a third of what we needed. We could fundraise. We fundraised. Marcus's co-workers at the engineering firm organized a raffle. My school district sent home a flyer with every kid in the building. My college roommate Jess set up a fundraising page at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night and shared it everywhere she could reach, and by morning it had been shared 400 times by strangers. People we had never met sent $20, $50, $100. A retired teacher in Minnesota sent $300 with a note that said she had a grandson who'd been a preemie, and she understood. A woman from our church who I had only ever spoken to during coffee hour wrote a check for $1,000 and left it in our mailbox. Marcus and I called our families the first night. My mother cried. She cried so hard she couldn't speak for several minutes, and my father had to take the phone. He told me they were so sorry. He told me they wished they could do more, he said. And I wrote this down, because I needed to hold on to something that night, he said. If we had it, Claire, you know we would give it to you. You know that. I knew that. I believed that completely. My in-laws, Marcus's parents, were retired and living on a fixed income themselves. They drove to the hospital and sat with us for a week, and brought food and held my hand in waiting rooms. But financially, there wasn't much they could do either. They gave us $2,000, which was real sacrifice for them, and I never forgot it. My parents sent $500. My mother called it everything we could pull together on short notice. She said their own medical bills had wiped out most of their savings over the last few years. She said they were so ashamed they couldn't do more. She cried again. I told her it was okay. I meant it. I thought it was the truth. Noah had his first surgery on March 21st. He was 7 days old. He weighed 2 pounds and 1 ounce by then, and the surgeon told us afterward that he was, in her words, a fighter. He came out of surgery. He spent 11 more weeks in the NICU. He came home in June in a car seat that looked absurdly large around his tiny body, and Marcus and I sat in the hospital parking garage for 20 minutes before either of us could start the car, because neither of us could stop crying. We came home to $47,000 in medical debt on top of our mortgage and our student loans and the credit card we'd run up on hospital meals and gas and the extended stay motel near the pediatric hospital, where Marcus slept 4 nights a week, so he could be there for morning rounds. We set up a payment plan. We stopped eating out. We canceled our streaming subscriptions. We sold Marcus's truck and bought a used Honda. We figured it out because that's what you do. You figure it out. Noah turned 1. He turned 2. His follow-up scans were better every time. His cardiologist said he was doing beautifully. He started walking at 14 months and talking in full sentences by 2.5, which apparently surprised everyone except Marcus and me, because we had watched him fight so hard just to exist that nothing about him surprised us anymore. He was extraordinary. He is extraordinary. He has Marcus's dark eyes and my mother's stubborn jaw, and he calls our cat Mr. Fluffington, sir, because he decided that one morning and would not be argued out of it. Life, slowly, got a little easier. The debt shrank. Marcus got a promotion. I picked up summer tutoring. My parents came to visit for Noah's 2nd birthday, and my mother sat on the floor and played trucks with him for 2 hours, and I thought, this is enough. Whatever happened before, this is enough. We were okay. And then I was standing in my kitchen on a Saturday afternoon in October, and I found the bank statement. I stood there for a long time. Long enough for Noah to get bored with the envelope and toddle off toward his trucks. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift across the kitchen floor. I read the document 3 times. The date, the amount, my brother Tyler's name on the receiving account, my parents' names on the sending account. A note in the memo field that said, housewarming with love. $185,000, March 14th. While Noah was on a ventilator and Marcus and I were sleeping in shifts in a family waiting room, and a retired teacher in Minnesota was mailing us $300 she had saved from her pension. I put Noah down for his nap. I sat at the kitchen table and I tried to find another explanation. I thought, maybe this is old money. Maybe this is an inheritance that had already been designated. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I pulled out my phone and I looked up the address of my brother's house, which I had been to once for the housewarming party that past spring. Marcus and I had driven 4 hours to attend. We had brought a gift, my parents had beamed at Tyler all evening, and my mother had kept saying how proud she was, how hard he'd worked, what a beautiful home he'd built for himself. He'd bought it, I now understood, almost entirely with their money. In the same month, they told me they had nothing. I did not call my parents that day. I didn't call them the next day either. I needed time to think, and I needed not to say something in front of Noah that would teach him a word I didn't want him learning yet. I called Jess. Jess had been my best friend since sophomore year of college. She was the one who had stayed on the phone with me for 4 hours the night before Noah's surgery. She was the one who drove 6 hours to sit in the hospital with me during his 2nd procedure at 8 months old. She listened to everything I said, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, very carefully, Claire, what do you want to do? I didn't know. That was the honest answer. I didn't know what I wanted to do, except that I wanted it not to be true, and I had already lost that option. I called my mother. I didn't tell her what I'd found at first. I asked her how she was, how my father was, how their trip had been. She was cheerful. She asked how Noah was sleeping, and then I said, very evenly, Mom, I found the transfer confirmation in Tyler's birthday card, the one you left here last weekend. The silence on the other end of the line was very long. My mother has a specific silence she goes into when she has been caught in something she can't explain away. I had heard it a handful of times in my childhood, small things, things that didn't matter. I recognized it immediately. Claire, she finally said. $185,000, I said. March 14th. I want you to help me understand, she cried. Of course she cried. She cried, and she said that she and my father had been setting that money aside for Tyler for years, that it had been in a separate account, that they thought of it almost as his inheritance pre-given, that Tyler had always struggled more than I did, that I was always so capable, so strong, that they knew Marcus and I would find a way through because we always did. She said they didn't think of it as choosing him over me. She said they thought of it as giving him what he needed because they knew I would be okay. I let her talk until she was done. Then I said, "My son was on a ventilator. He was 6 days old and he was on a ventilator, and you told me you had nothing." "That is not a misunderstanding, Mom. That is a lie," she said. "We're so sorry, honey. We were going to tell you." "When?" I said. "When were you going to tell me?" She didn't have an answer. I didn't scream. I didn't say anything cruel. I said that I needed time and that I would be in touch when I was ready, and I hung up. Marcus came home from a run 40 minutes later and found me sitting on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets. He sat down next to me without asking any questions, and I showed him the document on my phone, and we sat there together for a while, in the particular quiet of two people who have just had something confirmed that they are not sure they wanted to know. "Whatever you need," he said. "I know," I said. I stopped answering my parents' calls. I didn't block them. I want to be clear about that, because people sometimes assume the worst, and I need you to understand I was not looking for a fight. I simply stopped. There were voicemails I listened to and did not return. There were text messages I read and did not respond to. My father sent a letter, an actual handwritten letter, that arrived in a cream envelope and explained, in his careful engineer's handwriting, that they had made a terrible mistake, and they hoped I could find it in my heart to understand their intentions, even if not their actions. I kept the letter. I did not respond to it. My brother called twice. Tyler and I had never been especially close. There was a 5-year gap and different temperaments, and we had grown up in the same house more as polite cohabitants than as real friends. He left voicemails both times, saying he was sorry, that he hadn't known what they'd told me, that if he'd known, he would have offered to help. I didn't believe the last part, but I also didn't have the energy to pursue it. Tyler had his house. His life was not my project. 8 months passed. Noah started preschool and came home every day with new words and crayon drawings of our cat, and the deep conviction that dinosaurs were, quote, "definitely still out there somewhere, Mommy, they're just hiding." Marcus started training for a half marathon. I started a small after-school tutoring program at our community library on Thursday afternoons. Life kept moving, the way it does. And then my phone rang on a Thursday evening in June, and it was my mother, and something in the first syllable of my name told me this was not another apology call. My brother had collapsed at work 6 days earlier. He had been in the ICU since then. "They had been trying to reach me, and I hadn't answered," she said. Not accusatory, just factual. Tyler had been diagnosed with acute liver failure 18 months ago, something I had not been told, brought on by a condition that had apparently been progressing quietly for years. He had been on the transplant list. He had not been doing as well as they'd hoped. 3 days ago, his condition had deteriorated significantly. His doctors were saying it was a matter of weeks now, without a transplant, possibly less. They had tested every family member. My parents were not matches. My father's brother was not a match. Tyler's wife Amber had tested, and she was not a match. 3 family friends had volunteered and none were compatible. "They had tested me 8 months ago," my mother said, "before I stopped taking their calls. They had sent my records to the transplant center as part of a broad family screening. They had just received the results. I was a match." I sat in the kitchen, in almost exactly the same spot where I'd sat with the bank statement, and I listened to my mother tell me that I was the only person in our family who could save my brother's life. She was not asking me yet. She said she just needed me to know. She said she understood if I needed time. She said she was sorry. She kept saying she was sorry. The word was wearing grooves into the air between us. I told her I needed to think. She said okay. She said Tyler's wife had their number. She said she loved me, and she would understand whatever I decided. I hung up and I sat there for a while. And then Noah came padding into the kitchen in his dinosaur pajamas and climbed into my lap, which he still does sometimes, even though he's almost too big for it now, and he put his head against my chest and said, "You're sad, Mommy." "A little bit," I said. "Is it about Uncle Tyler?" he said. I hadn't thought he'd been listening. He's 3. They hear everything. Yes, I said. It is. Is he gonna be okay? I looked at my son. I looked at his dark eyes, his stubborn jaw, the small scar on his sternum that you can barely see anymore unless you know to look for it. I thought about what I wanted him to learn from me, not what I wanted to do. I want to be honest with you. I want to be honest about the fact that what I wanted was to not be in this situation at all, to never have found that bank statement, to be someone with a completely uncomplicated family who could make this decision from a clean and simple place. That was what I wanted. But I was not that person, and this was not that situation. And my son was in my lap asking me if his uncle was going to be okay. I called Jess. I called Marcus. I talked for a long time. Marcus said what he always says. Whatever you need, I'm here. Jess, who loves me and is also the most honest person in my life, said Claire. I would understand completely if you didn't. What they did was unforgivable. You are allowed to say no. She paused. But I also know you, and I think you need to ask yourself what you can live with. That was the question, wasn't it? Not what they deserved. Not what was fair. What could I live with? I thought about the $185,000. I thought about Noah in the NICU. I thought about my parents' voices telling me they had nothing. I thought about Tyler's 2 children, 4 and 6 years old. I'd seen photos on my mother's refrigerator, who had not been part of any of this, and who were right now somewhere being told that their daddy was very sick. I thought about what Noah had asked me. I called Amber. Amber and I had never been close either. She was quieter than Tyler, more guarded, and our relationship had always lived at the polite surface level of family events and group texts. She answered on the second ring, and her voice was raw and exhausted in the way that only comes from days of not sleeping. I told her I needed her to listen to me before I said what I was going to say. I told her I needed her to know that I was doing this for my own reasons and not because anything had been forgiven, and that I was going to need complete honesty about Tyler's prognosis and about what the donation process would involve, and that I was going to have questions that I expected real answers to. She said yes. She said absolutely yes. She said she understood. And I need you to tell my parents, I said, that I will be there for Tyler, but that I am not there for them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I need them to understand that distinction. I'll tell them, Amber said. Her voice broke a little on the last word. How are your kids? I said. And I don't know entirely why I asked except that it seemed like the most honest place to start. She was quiet for a moment. They keep asking when Daddy's coming home, she said. I closed my eyes. Okay, I said. Tell me what I need to do. The donation process took 3 weeks of testing and evaluation, and 2 consultations with the transplant team. Marcus took a week off work and drove me to every appointment. Our neighbor watched Noah 3 afternoons while we were gone. The surgical team was thorough and honest about risks and recovery timelines, and I asked every question I had, and they answered all of them. I was healthy. I was a strong candidate. The surgery went forward. I will not tell you it was easy. The surgery was 5 hours and recovery was harder than I expected, and there were 4 days in the hospital and 3 weeks at home where I was in more pain than I let on to anyone except Marcus. He brought me tea in the mornings and dealt with Noah's entire morning routine without complaint and did not once suggest that I should feel differently about any of it. Tyler survived the surgery. His prognosis after transplant was cautiously good. His doctors were optimistic. I did not see my parents at the hospital. That had been my condition, communicated through Amber, and they honored it. My mother sent a text message the evening after the surgery that said only, "Thank you. I love you. I'm so sorry." I read it and I put my phone down and I let myself feel whatever I was feeling, which was something complicated and not entirely reducible to a single emotion. 6 weeks after my surgery, a letter arrived from my parents' attorney. Inside was a document establishing a medical trust fund in Noah's name, funded with $185,000, earmarked exclusively for his ongoing cardiac care and any future medical needs. There was a handwritten note from my father clipped to it. "We cannot give you back what we took from you. We can only try to make it right for him. No response necessary. No obligation attached." I read the letter twice. Marcus read it. We put it in a folder. Then I called the attorney and told her we would accept it, for Noah, and that the trust could be managed independently, without any involvement from my parents, unless Noah's medical team required otherwise. My mother called once more, a few months later. I answered. We talked for 45 minutes. I did not tell her everything was fine. I did not tell her I had forgiven them, because I haven't, not really, not in the full sense of the word. What I told her was that I was not going to spend the rest of my life carrying their choices around with me, that Noah was healthy and thriving, and had a trust fund now for his heart, and that Marcus and I were doing well, and that I was glad Tyler was alive. I told her that maybe, in time, there would be room for something that looked like a relationship, and that I was not closing that door, but I was not opening it either. I was just leaving it where it was for now. She said she understood. She cried a little. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't, and I didn't want to give her that. What I did tell her, before we hung up, was something I had been thinking about for months. I told her that the reason I donated was not because of guilt, and not because of pressure, and not because I thought Tyler deserved it more than he deserved the consequences of having parents who played favorites. I told her I donated because I had spent 3 years watching my son fight to be alive, and somewhere in those 3 years I had become a person who could not look at someone fighting to stay alive and choose to walk away. Not because of them. Because of me. Because of who Noah made me want to be. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's so lucky to have you for his mother." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Not what she said, exactly, but the feeling underneath it, the particular grief of knowing that you raised someone who is extraordinary in spite of you, not because of you. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, which was something close to pity. Not forgiveness, but pity, which is a different thing. Pity says, I understand how you became this, and I am sad for it, and I am choosing not to be consumed by it. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Noah turned 4 in November. We had a dinosaur party in the backyard with 6 kids from his preschool class, and a dinosaur cake that Marcus spent 2 hours decorating and that Noah declared, with complete seriousness, to be the most perfect cake in the entire world, including space. Marcus and I stood at the kitchen window and watched him run across the yard with his friends, and I thought about March 14th, 4 years ago, and the ventilator, and the surgeon, and the waiting room, and the retired teacher in Minnesota. And I thought about what it had cost us, and what it had built in us, and I thought that if I had to choose between the version of myself who existed before that experience, and the version who existed now, the one who knew what she could survive, who knew what really mattered, who had a son who called their cat Mr. Fluffington, sir, and believed with total confidence that dinosaurs were out there hiding, I would choose this one. Not because the pain was worth it. Some pain is just pain, and there's no lesson in it, and it doesn't need to be redeemed. But because I was still here. Noah was still here. Marcus was still here. And that, on a November afternoon with a dinosaur cake and 6 4-year-olds running in circles in our backyard, was not a small thing. It was, actually, everything.